everyone has joined now. I think attendees have joined. I'm not sure I've quite got the right view, but hopefully we have got people that have signed up to it on the call now. Thank you so much for joining. This is the PRCA Business Development Group. I'm Rebecca. I have got far too many years experience working in an agency in a business development role, and I co-chair this group alongside Anuska Leon. And hopefully what you'll get out today is looking at really answering the questions of where do you start with business development. Obviously there's so much that can touch on business development, and really it's thinking through the different phases of awareness, consideration, and then finally hopefully through to conversion, and what do you need to be thinking about at those different phases to make sure that you're really successful in achieving everything that you need to do. Anuska, have you got anything you want to join, or should we kick off?
Just, hello everyone. I'm also had an unhealthy amount of years working in business development, the last sort of 12 within agency. And yeah, just really happy to answer any questions anyone has. Feel free to come to me via LinkedIn or whatever, and looking forward to this.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Anuska. I suppose it's over to me. So yeah, so my name is Chris Kemp. I'm the CEO and founder of Ingenuity, and obviously we work very closely with the PRCA in a number of different capacities, and obviously including trying to help with members and partners in terms of giving them an insight into business development and the kind of changing nature of that. So in terms of kind of a little bit about Ingenuity, I set up Ingenuity 18 years ago. We're about 80 odd people, and we help agencies come together and find the right brand partners, essentially, in terms of winning the right type of clients. And we do that in a number of different ways, of which Ollie's going to talk in a bit more detail about today. We also do a lot of work with brands directly to help them find agencies, which is obviously something we do with the PRCA, and also people like ISBA and a bit and other trade bodies and partners. So we're very, very fortunate that we get to see lots and lots of agencies' credentials. We get to see how agencies sell themselves from cold, but we also get to see how they do that in the room in the conversion stage, as Rebecca talked about. And I think that's really important to start with, is how you do look at those three different areas, from that awareness, consideration through to conversion. And we'll obviously be talking about some of that today. But the key objective, you probably read this now, is to share kind of actionable tips and hacks on agency to brand business development practice, best practice and effectiveness, and explore how our ecosystem is kind of set up to do that. And obviously you don't need to use our ecosystem, but hopefully by seeing the way that we've set our business up, that will give you a good understanding of best practice. And so in terms of that, Ollie's going to talk in a lot more detail about basically propositions and copywriting.
Yeah, and indeed business development channels as well. And then we're going to go on to exciting new business development formats that we've started to kind of see real impact from. Then we're going to go take a look at pipeline development and how actually everyone becomes fixated with acquisition and numbers at the cost of actually developing a pipeline. And then we'll wrap it up with some insights, which kind of goes into the detail of how we find and prospect our individuals. Hello, Chris, back in the game.
So I think, I don't know where I got today, but Ollie obviously took over, and that's great timing because Ollie's going to take on from now. So hopefully Ollie's picked up from there. Apologies, my Wi-Fi never goes down, so apologies. Over to you, Ollie.
All good, thank you very much. And thank you indeed to everyone who's here. Really appreciate you tuning in. And yeah, I can't see the mystery guests, but yeah, if at the end of this you want to connect, just drop me or Chris a note and we can go from there. I'm going to go through this. I'm not really going to hover too much on any slide in particular, but because we've got a Q&A at the end, so I'll crack on just because it's the straightforward thing to do. Just a quick one before we start. I think it's quite important to acknowledge that there are tons of agencies out there, really good ones, and there always will be. And when you're starting from a standing start, like most agencies are, when they're going after brands that they really want to work with, it comes down more often than not to keeping it really simple. It takes years to craft and hone a proposition. But we'll come on to some tips to kind of make your proposition perform from the get-go and deliver better cut through. And it's not as challenging as you might think, which is the good news. So again, I suppose before we start, I think it's really important to know that brand building and having a proposition and standing for something is absolutely critical. It's a no-brainer. You always need to stand out from the crowd. But I think in our world, you know, you need to win attention quickly, especially from cold. So with that in mind, I think you've got to kind of put that your mantra, the awards you've won, the accolades, I guess the subjectives really on the back burner, and focus on the challenges that you solve for brands quickly. You know, when you do that, we found that the cut through and the cut through is just significantly more productive. So we'll come on to quickly look at what an example of this actually looks like in the real world. And I'll hover over this. I mean, this is just one example of the many that we see across Ingenuity. And, you know, some of them are going to be right for your business. There's no one size fits all policy, but I'll just linger here for a moment. Okay, this deck will come to all of you at the end, and we can round up on the Q&A and we can talk through this specifically. But this is a kind of this is an approach that has delivered some pretty good results for us rather recently. And just to conclude that, across the board, once we adopt a kind of challenge first stance to our output, you know, the results are significantly more successful. And this is just, again, that ties into the whole attention thing. A lot of the people and the brands that we speak to are constantly on the move. Everyone's vying for their attention. It's, you know, digital overload, as we all know, and can sympathize with. So design your approach to win attention on small screens, because the majority of these notes and indeed approaches from agencies are actually read on mobiles, on trains, or on the go in between meetings. So just another point to be mindful of. And these are onto new business channels. Chris, you are absolute god at presenting this slide, so I'll just transition to you quickly for the moment, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, you know, what we're trying to get at today is just talk about those different layers. And I think where it's really important to start with, understand what do you need to achieve as an agency. So most agency new business comes through word of mouth and recommendation. So sometimes they're already actually at that consideration stage with a lot of their inbound stuff that comes through because, you know, they've been recommended by someone. So if you start with awareness, you've got to look at actually what are those channels that you can use. So obviously, you know, PR is a good one in terms of your own PR and your own visibility. But then, you know, it is about content. And I think the big thing really is that, you know, we all, a lot of us have kind of LinkedIn overload, but LinkedIn is a great channel to get that content out in. So what content do I have? What channels am I using? What am I doing with LinkedIn? What am I doing across paid, earned and owned? And I think that's a really, really good place to start, is that fundamental of content and then the kind of paid, earned and owned space within that. Once you've got to that, it's about action really. So the consideration stage is really then about, I suppose, using the different tools. So it's where you kind of, you look at your gold list, looking at your own events, you're looking at outbound campaigns, so thought leadership around a particular area, and that might be around a topical issue. You're looking at how you can use LinkedIn on a very bespoke level. Again, going back to kind of bought events, you know, going to events are now starting to come back off the back of COVID. We did one last week, the PR one with the PRCA, and it was great to see so many people there face to face enjoying the day and talking again in a different way than they would do just virtually. And then, you know, this is something we do as masterclasses, but, you know, being able to do your own webinars and your own events and get those out there and get people along makes a huge, huge difference. And then the conversion stage is kind of, as we really described, really, is how do you pitch to win? Are you using the right areas of your business? And that might also include, working with partners in the world of procurement, for example, to making sure that you're honing your skills and how you're going to win that final pitch piece. So we talk about these as the kind of different almost services or channels that you can use within those kind of 3 different areas. Over to you, Ollie.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just again to kind of piggyback off the back of that. So agencies, they are essentially brands in their own right, and they really start to behave like brands. So, as the B2B marketing world evolves, the channels we've got to use to influence these brands, has to move with it. So, in our arsenal, we have e-marketing, the good old-fashioned phone call, social media targeting, events, etc., etc. But actually, for the most part, a decent channel mix is kind of redundant if you've not got a really robust content strategy and plan in place that's fueling your output that you can build your agency around. Content is, more now than ever, one of the fundamental pillars of success for agencies. The buying process from the brand end is particularly, significantly more forensic than it ever has been, just due to the saturation of the market. So content that content that converts specifically, is a no-brainer. We're going to look now at some exciting new business formats that have led to really, really good cut through for several of our agencies. This is a particular example for the OR, which is a content studio from Mother. And what we've done here as a case study activation is actually get the client, Bloom and Wild, to talk about the relationship, the agency relationship to brands, which is a really smart way of activating a really, really lovely scope of work without the agency actually doing too much. So this is a kind of new frontier of business development, if you like. And if you have really tight relationships with your clients, this is definitely something we encourage you to look at. And again, I'm really happy to talk you through the specific results off the back of it. And this is just one example. The other is what we call masterclasses. Now, there's not much difference, to be honest with you, between a masterclass and a meeting. It's kind of a meeting masqueraded in a masterclass. It feels like an event to the recipient, but it feels like a meeting to the agency. So you get you basically get loads of brands tuning in for half an hour. You don't tend to give them too much on the call. You curtail it around 30-40 minutes and the purpose of doing that is to make sure that they actually want more and want to talk to you off the back of it. So we've seen real good success with this approach too, and it doesn't feel too salesy, and the value exchange is just right for brands. Brand interviews as well. So this is an example of an event that we ran recently, and the process afterwards wasn't actually to go and say, look, we want to meet you, even though we really do, because it felt a bit predictable. And by doing that, you make the opportunity to create content off the back of it a little bit redundant, because you can kind of scare them off a little bit by asking for that meeting that feels oh so predictable. So for context, this is a reusable nappy brand. Probably something that you wouldn't have expected to see on this deck, but nonetheless, this is the context. So I use this brand. My family have used this brand. My girls have grown up their entire lives knowing this brand. But basically, what we've done is we want to interview these particular brands to co-create content to give our agency more gravitas. So I wondered if you'd consider being interviewed by us and be one of the individuals that says a few words on behalf of Bambino Mio. Great. So why is this a good way of getting into brands? Because there are so many more touch points if you go down this process. Normally, if you ask for a meeting, they can say yes or no or maybe. I suppose the same could go with an interview, but once you've got in there, there are many more hoops to jump through. There's legal, there's internal PR, there's amendments, there's the actual interview itself. So there's just so many more interactions with that brand, and subconsciously, your agency brand and you as an individual are getting closer to them. Here are some other examples of content from the brand interviews used for agency brand building that we put together. This was a lovely one with Margaret Jobling for one of our clients, Mullen Lowe. They are trying to stamp out ageism at the moment in, not just the brand world, but also our agency world too. Here's Pete Markey. It could be Pete Markey. It could be one of the 10 Pete Markeys that are out there at the moment. But yeah, I mean, these are some of how the interviews kind of look and are brought to life. And when you post these on social, whether you feature them in thought leadership pieces or whatever you want to do with them, it really adds to your IP.
I think this is a really nice, just jumping in there, and it's a really nice example where, if you just go back to the first slide with Margaret, Ollie, creating something like this is something that's really come from the agency as well. So Nikki Bernard, the Chief Creative Officer there, has really kind of driven this. And then, being able to get brands to have a point of view on this is just so powerful. So not only do you get that interaction through the interviews that you're doing with them, and you get to know these people and talk to them, but you actually start to create something. I mean, in this instance, it's almost a bit of a movement, really, in terms of what they did at Cannes and that piece around that, where Nikki had T-shirts with a date of birth on. And I just think, stuff like this, not every agency can do something to this size because of what the cost might be, or having the ability to do it. But I think just trying to own something and then doing really lovely content and interviews around that and getting the community involved with it is such a powerful way of doing your business. And lots of agencies, you don't have to be huge to do this. It's just about having a really good idea and then seeing it through and getting lots of people to be part of the conversation. I think particularly within PR, the whole thing is about conversation. So actually trying to get those people involved in that conversation is absolutely imperative. So I think this is a really, really lovely example of how you can use interviews in a good way, particularly when it ladders up to something really, really meaningful. Thanks, Ollie.
Thank you. And I suppose as a business as well, we very much know what content converts, and these are just, I guess, some examples of the content through thought leadership, short and long form pieces of content that we've put together for various different clients recently. This is an interview channel plan, essentially, which it's the kind of lifeline of how we use the content, really, and how we activate it. I'm happy to talk through this afterwards, but I won't linger too long on this now. Again, just talking about the kind of the content, we know what content converts. This is one of our new offerings as well. So the content performance agency for agencies. I don't think there's anyone that we know of that knows the agency brand world like we do at the moment, and especially true when it comes to the content they produce. So yeah, as Chris was saying, we really encourage agencies to take ownership of a certain space, and we really help them on their road to success through performance content. Pipeline development. Now, it's really easy to be fixated on acquisition and getting the numbers in and having as many conversations as possible. But actually, once you've started to create a really good pipeline, you've got to make sure that you're speaking to them. It's almost like community management, really. There's no difference. And this is where content really comes into its own, is actually sharing really, really relevant pieces with your pipeline. This is what we call a cadence. I'm sure we're going to call it something different at some point. But yeah, in simple terms, it is basically a process to follow once you have spoken to a brand and what to do next. Now, not all cadences are born equal. They are going to be different. depending on the conversation that you had, and indeed your agency, and indeed the tools available to you in your arsenal, like content, like thought leadership papers, etc., etc. But it's really important that you have one of these or a version of this in place. We will wrap up very shortly, but we'll just talk to you about where we source insights and how to build a compelling new business campaign off the back of them. It's just, this is a screen of various social platforms and indeed press websites, but this is our kind of bread and butter. When we go after brands, we have to do a lot of reading. We have to have our finger on the pulse, probably more than anyone. I'd always want us to win the pub quiz with our knowledge of the industry. This is where we start. Our account managers will basically read for the first half of the week before putting pen to paper, and then I guess finding the challenges of the marketplace, what's going on in the wider world, and actually bringing the agency proposition and that challenge together. But it's fairly self-explanatory, really. It's a lot of insight and a lot of reading, but that's kind of where we start. We look at what's going on in these areas.
I think it's such a big thing now in terms of understanding the kind of the pulse of the nation, and obviously at the moment there's so much change for what's going on, a kind of inflation, cost of living, energy crisis, all the different things that we know about. And I think therefore that actually more so than ever in new business, it's really understanding those big things that are affecting brands. And I think kind of particularly I think a lot of outreach can be too focused about my agency and how brilliant we are and how we can solve your problems, whereas actually I just think it needs to be a lot more representative about those challenges that brands are having. So brands being delisted, or brands really struggling with their supply chain, or struggling to get the staff that they need for various different reasons in certain kind of hard industries. And I think it's just jumping and picking up on those different areas. So the news will be reporting that Wetherspoons have closed X number of pubs last week. And that's brilliant, but how do you then take that through to what that's going to mean for the drinks industry in general, and what's happening about people's disposable income? So it's really trying to pick up on those stories the whole time around insight. So, it's a combination of the wider world in terms of those big issues. It's then a conversation of your own industry. So the grocer, if you're targeting within FMCG, anything related to packaged goods, it's really under reading that and understanding it. The same with people like Retail Week. But then I suppose it's then also getting down to your level in terms of, their own publications such as Campaign, PR Week, whatever it may be. So it's trying to look at the wider picture. I also think there's a lot that can always be learned from insights in terms of what's happening in other markets. So what's going on in the States and what's going on across Europe, and trying to utilize that information to take that through. So there's loads of different intel out there, as well, of course, of actually looking at things on a more individual level in terms of what those brands are talking about, or key people within those brands. So if you are targeting certain individuals within an organization, look at what the other C-suite are saying in terms of the CTOs, the CIOs, anyone really that's kind of connected to kind of running that business. Because I think increasingly that's becoming a more collaborative thing. So in the old days, the marketing stuff would very much sit with the CMO or the heads of comms. But I think now actually the roles of the CFOs, the CEOs, the heads of people within these organizations, everyone is taking much more of an active view on the positioning of that business. So utilizing as much information as you can from an insight point of view is absolutely crucial to kind of your outreach programs. And with all of that then in mind, it allows you to kind of create a cohesive, clear plan. And I talk to agencies a lot about this, is using the best channels for you. So it's all about really understanding where you can play to your benefits and how you can play to your play to your strengths, essentially. So picking those right things. You can't do everything brilliantly. So what are those things you're going to invest in? If you're brilliant at content, you've got loads of great thought leadership, how are you going to double down that in terms of the bought space, in terms of getting that out in the right channels? If you're really well connected, how are you running events to get really interesting speakers along? That's going to then snowball into getting other interesting speakers along as well. So hopefully that makes some stuff that some sense around the kind of the insight thing of how you bring it all together as well.
And I think that's a wrap. Thank you very much.
I think with these things, what we try and do is give you a bit of an understanding there, some insights of what we've got there, and try and jump to any questions. And you know, that's the good way of kind of talking through different plans and things. So I don't know if it's worth jumping back to Rebecca at this stage, and if we then got any questions that we can kind of fire through, then feel free to do so.
Yeah, and guys, I think either put some questions in the chat if you've got it, or feel free to ask us some questions. But also, if you, as Chris has said, if you want to take a look at the deck and mull it over and then come back to Anuska and I with some questions, the PRCA will certainly be able to forward those on to us. I think there's one for you, Oliver, about how masterclasses differ from traditional webinars.
That is a very good question. Well, there isn't actually too much difference. But it is the very term webinar has the ability to kind of throw people off balance, really. They also tend to last for an hour, typically an hour, maybe a bit more. With these masterclasses, I guess it's a more alluring way of saying a mini webinar, but the masterclasses last for 30 minutes tops, and the aim of that is to basically make the brands want to know more about the agency, and once they are interested, then you have the opportunity to schedule a one-to-one meeting. So essentially the masterclass is a kind of funnel filler and designed to make people want more, whereas a webinar, you're driving people to a destination. The masterclasses are actually really light touch. There's no heavy lifting required. There's kind of no there's not too much, you know, coordination between teams. It's already there in the agency. Like, for example, if you were going to present to a brand that you were going to have a meeting with anyway, you would present the masterclass and vice versa. So that's kind of where they differ, although there's not too much in it.
But they're also a simple thing that we as Ingenuity, without it becoming I don't want to make this about Ingenuity and kind of what we can do for you guys, but we do a masterclass series quite often now, where we're actually we're doing regular masterclasses as Ingenuity, whereas a lot of what we've spoken about today is obviously going out as you as the agency. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to pick big subject areas and then invite agencies to talk on those subject areas in that kind of short half an hour. This is, you know, the really nice kind of intel, quite light touch stuff, because that's quite a nice way of utilizing our community that we've built up as Ingenuity. And it's a great way of getting those agencies to kind of buy into that and come as part of that. So it can feel a bit more less being sold to, rather than a webinar that, again, is, you know, very much pushing the agency. So it is a bit more light touch, and it's also kind of the general conversation around a particular subject area. It might be, you know, cost of living, or it might be what that means for the PR industry, or it might be the recession and what that knock-on effects. Obviously, areas such as sustainability and D&I, obviously big areas that people are obviously constantly talking about as well. So it's picking those subject areas, but then it's doing it away as Ingenuity. We go out as Ingenuity and ask agencies to talk around those areas. Whereas if you're doing webinars, they tend to be driven as you, the agency.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think also, you know, we're the sort of masters of optics, aren't we? And I think the thing with a webinar feels like you're being driven to a format, whereas a masterclass, inherently, there is something about learning.
Yes.
And I think, you know, the point that Chris and Oliver are just saying around, you know, light touch, it is about a subject that they clearly have some appetite for knowing more about. So, you know, purely from a sort of optics point of view, it feels more enticing.
Definitely. And I think that another key thing to mention is when you're doing agency masterclasses, so for example, if we take on your DNA and we go out as X agency, the masterclasses focus on case studies. So they're actually just specifically focused around particular scope of work. They're not trying to talk about societal issues. They're not trying to talk about XYZ. They're actually they're actually just activating a case study in a different format and giving that case study and scope of work a platform like you would expect to see at an event, which is why they tend to be fairly successful. It's just a nicer way of giving back to brands, or even giving to brands, than it would be to approach them and saying, hey, do you want to see this great scope of work we did for Corn or Ribena? This is what we've done for them. Tune in to find out. If you want more, great, let's talk. So that's how they are. So you kind of start to see the differences there.
I think there's a question from Jenny, isn't there? On
yeah, there's a question, a very thorny question, shall we say, around how do you embed new business across the agency, and making sure that everyone feels responsible and accountable for the growth of the agency. I mean, you know, from my point of view, having done this for, you know, nearly 20 years, that is the secret sauce, isn't it? It's about it's not about what one person can do. It's about that one person being able to share the responsibilities right across the agency. And I think it only comes from having a dedicated focus on it within the agency. It doesn't happen naturally. It has to happen as a result of a plan that is signed off, a plan that is shared, a plan that has budget behind it. You need, you know, to have interesting points of view, you have to do interesting things. And so it's really got to come from the company getting behind it and really wanting to involve everybody in it. I don't know if Anushka, have you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just that it's an ongoing process. It can take a very long time and can feel like pushing water uphill often. But you know, like Rebecca said, it's just about having those sort of plans signed off, constantly engaging with them, and also trying to educate the wider business how important new business is. New business is everybody's business. It's the only way that agencies can survive, and it is the lifeblood of agencies. And they, you know, it's just about educating everyone so they actually understand that they all need to play a role in this, to keep things going.
I think it's obviously such a topical thing at the moment, isn't it? In the sense of, I agree with everything you've just both said there. I think it starts with a great plan, but I think what you have to do is you have to give people content, and then you have to allow them to basically utilize their own channels. Because the thing about, you know, LinkedIn is a good example. You're speaking on the behalf of yourself rather than just your agency. So agencies' LinkedIn, you know, pages aren't very strong. It's all about the individuals within those agencies. That's where people follow. And so I think to start, it's about giving good content to your, in this instance, your mid-level staff, that they feel comfortable sharing that content and commenting on it, because actually that's the way they build their networks. They don't build their networks in a way that, you know, probably people like myself that have done new business for a long time, and, you know, Rebecca, we've been out there in a different way of building those relationships with people face to face. And so I think it's actually more about how they can utilize that from an online point of view, but then that they can then follow it through themselves and organize meetings and conversations with people. So it's giving them the tools. I also think it's really important to encourage people within your organization to talk about this in the office, so to come in the office and to share those experiences. And I think it's really important for the management team to get mid-level staff involved in those chemistry sessions and those pitches, so they can learn from people doing it. I think that's been one of the things about people not being in the office so much nowadays, that is a negative thing, that they don't get to see so much of those kind of new business conversations and some of the stuff that they can then learn through osmosis. So I think getting people out to events, when you're doing stuff in the office, getting people that, you know, are your superstars at that mid-level to meet more clients and to then have the confidence to kind of upsell and cross-sell to them. I think agencies I talk to right across the board, across every discipline, they find that a lot of people within account management aren't as good as they used to be at the upsell. And I think that's probably because they're not spending as much time with them around that. So I think it's definitely an important thing to encourage, because, you know, your best sorts of leads are going to come from people that you know already. And so if you've got those people that have got that network, really encourage them to grow their own network.
Yeah. And again, when we start working with clients, we ask them to put together what we call a gold list, which ranges between sort of 10 or 20 businesses that they'd really like to work with. And it's not just that you know, the client services team or the MD, whoever it is that took us on. We want them to kind of cast that net to all of the branches within their team. So from, you know, design to data science, whoever it may be, who do they really want to work with? You know, who would make their lives at the agency, you know, a better place? Who would they jump out of bed for? And that's, you know, once we have that, we'll try and bring that to life for that agency and those individuals. And if we get a meeting with one of the people that they really want to work with, that's a great starting point. It's a really difficult process, but I think you've got to start quite slowly. But that's one way of kind of encouraging a growth mindset and getting people in the mood for new business.
Great. I think that is all the questions that we've had so far. Chris and Oliver, does it come from you or does it come from the PRCA when the doc circulated?
We can send it through and it can come out
Right.
from the PRCA. That's
Okay.
absolutely fine. Yeah, we can share that information. If anyone's got any additional questions, really, you know, I think everyone's always in a different place on this, aren't they, when it comes to new business? You know, some people are quite sophisticated, some they're starting. I think the thing about it is always it's constantly refining it and trying different things, and the market's changing so quickly. It's kind of being open to those changes. Yeah, if anyone's got any questions, my details will be on there, and so will Ollie's. So feel free to drop over a note. But really, thanks everyone for making the time today. I know it's a busy time always, so thank you for jumping online.
Exactly, and thank you from me, and I'm sure from Anuska as well. Yeah. All right.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you later. Bye now.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye. Bye.